Welcome to the week of January 19th. We start this week with a high quality workout that we haven't done for a longer interval than normal because this is one that I like. Obviously, I like a lot of them, but this one is loaded steady state run. And we start with the 2 mile steady state run at threshold, getting a good warm up to make sure that you can get to threshold as quickly as possible. Because in this workout, as with most threshold runs, we're interested not only in the pace that you can run and stay aerobic, we're also interested in how much of the time during the workout that you can accumulate at that level. So want to get a good warm up, do your striders, be ready to go, ramp up as quickly and as efficiently as possible to threshold for that first 2 miles. At the end of that 2 miles, jog, slow-mo recovery jog for 1 minute, and then start 5 times 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And then we're going to go back into a steady state run. What we're doing with those minutes is we're getting you to where you're really warmed up, you're really ready to run fast, but you're not all that fatigued yet, so you're going to run faster than if we did them at the end. You're probably going to run faster than if we did them at the beginning because you're really warm from that 2 mile threshold run. It's about as much running as you can do before you start seeing some diminishing effect on the speed. So that's why it's in the middle. It's also a great mix of workout components. When we come back to the second steady state run, and some of you have a mile, depending on your total mileage and where you are in your training. But if you're coming back for the 2 mile steady state run at the end, that can be at threshold, which is top end aerobic running. Or it can be threshold plus, where you're kind of in between, where you haven't gone anaerobic yet, but you're producing lactic acid, but it's at a level that you can buffer it and continue to go. You're not on borrowed time as if you went over that level. So when we're done with this, we've accumulated some great stamina to be able to maintain a pace work with the threshold running. We've accomplished some economy running if you've done the threshold plus, because we're over that threshold level. And then certainly with the fast minutes, and those are fast, you should be cranking on those. Obviously, if you have some aches or pains, we want to moderate that. But if you're healthy and you're fit, we want to crank. So get that 1 minute really fast, that 1 minute recovery jog. And I do prefer a jog because we're training your mind as well, that we don't just stop and walk. We can recover while we're running. And that's something that we're training your body and mind to be able to do. But it can be slow-mo recovery jogging. As I like to say, if you get passed by a tree, you're probably jogging at the right speed, and then repeat those. But as a reminder, because it isn't written in Training Peaks this way, after the first 2 miles, take the minute recovery jog. After the last of the 5 times 1 minute or whatever you have in your version of the workout, another slow-mo recovery minute, and then right back into that steady state. The moderate quality workout this week, 30-60s, we do this one frequently, so we don't need to talk about that too much, but we're after the benefits of aerobic intervals or aerobic speed. So you're running as fast as you can, but you're staying aerobic for 30 seconds. That's not too difficult. So 800 meter pace to mile pace. It should not be your 200 meter pace because you're going to go anaerobic certainly before that 30 seconds is up. So we're running fast, the 60-second jog, maybe not quite as slow-mo as up here, but it's as slow as you need to go to get recovered to keep those fast. That's written as 2 to 3 miles worth of that. So if you find that you're kind of slowing down, and no matter how slow you're jogging, those 30 seconds are getting slower and slower, take a little bit longer and then start over. Maybe you get to the end of a mile, or you get to the end of 2 miles and you can tell you're slowing down. Run for a few minutes, just nice, easy running, and then start that 3rd mile. Hill options on this. Now, I have an asterisk by that suggestion because of what's coming on the long run. So maybe you don't want to do this week, but when we do 30-60s, this is certainly an option. And yes, I'm thinking of those of you running the Boston Marathon or any other hilly course for that matter. And we'll talk about this a little more with the long run. Running fast downhill counts too. We always think of hill repeats as just running up, and that makes sense. You're fighting gravity, you're getting strength training very specific to running, you're getting all kinds of great things. but we also want to run downhill fast. So you can either do these 30-60s where you do the 30 seconds up the hill, jog down, kill your 60 seconds, and then go back up. Or you can do it to where you're running up for 30 seconds, you're recovering at the top of the hill, and then you come back down fast, recover at the bottom of the hill, and repeat that. So your 30s on those 30-60s are either up or downhill. So those are all beneficial. If you haven't been running a great deal of hills, this is probably not the week to pull that out, because the long run. The long run includes 2-mile hill segments. And I'm thinking of Boston people with this one, obviously, but I'm thinking of anybody, because this workout is fantastic if you're running Monumental or Chicago, or running Boston or some other hilly course. Depending on the distance of your long run, 2 to 4 times 2 miles on a hilly segment. At Eagle Creek, we're going to go gatehouse to gatehouse. That makes the most sense, because when you're running that section at a good effort, you realize how little of that is actually flat. Some of that, when you're running easy, you think might be flat, but then when you're running harder, obviously, it doesn't take much of a hill to get your attention when you're running a little bit harder. So that's a significant amount of mileage. For some of you, that's going to be 8 miles. And for those of you doing 8 miles, your long run distance is probably 16, somewhere around there, certainly no less than 14 to get 4 of those reps. But doing that, and how we'll do it at Eagle Creek, gatehouse to gatehouse, get that 2 miles in. And somewhere, if you start on the south end of the park, at the north end of the park, you'll do a easy recovery mile, maybe more, depending on how you want to distribute this throughout your long run, and then come back, get that 2 miles, recover on the south end of the park, and go back and forth. This is a fantastic workout because it's adding a lot of training effect to, for what most of you is a shorter long run week. But we're running hills. If you do a long run on the Monon versus a long run at Eagle Creek, if you've done both, you know where the better training effect is. You have to go a whole lot faster on the Monon to equal the training effect that you're getting by running on the hills. So you certainly want to do that. In Training Peaks, I wrote it as 80 to 85%. And take that just as trying to get you in the ballpark of the effort. I want it to be a strenuous effort. I want it to be steady running, but I don't want it to bury you to where you feel terrible Sunday, you feel terrible Monday, you're not recovered by Tuesday. So moderate that a little bit, and certainly 80 to 85% during a 12, 14, 16 or longer mile run isn't the same as doing it here. And over here, I talked about the 2 mile pace at threshold should be somewhere maybe around 10K pace, maybe a half marathon pace, depending on where you are on the performance spectrum. But let's say it's 10K pace. That would be the first 2 miles of a 10K, not the last 2 miles of a 10K. Because the last 2 miles of a 10K, you are anaerobic, you are working really hard. So it's not always the same. And that's why it's hard to say, this is my tempo pace, this is my easy day pace. It's what context is it in? How much are you doing? What fatigue are you bringing into the workout, or rest that you're bringing into the workout? So 80 to 85% here is not going to be as fast as that. Yeah, in part because it's on hills. But you should be thinking about, I'm going to work towards threshold. And maybe it's marathon pace, maybe it's half marathon pace, but somewhere in there. It shouldn't be just regular long run pace. If you've run hilly races, or you run Boston, one of the things that becomes very apparent very quickly is running relaxed long run pace on hills is not enough to be ready to race on hills. There's something about the increased muscular tension of running down hills, running up hills after you've had the pounding down the hill. So that's why it's important to run these a little bit faster. Yes, if you do easy long runs on hills, it's better than doing easy long runs on flat and going to run Boston or a hilly course. So that one should be good and challenging. The overall pace of your long run might not change a whole lot, because you're going to do a few miles to get warmed up, a few miles probably to cool down, a few miles in between as recoveries, and the fast part are on hills. So the pace might not be all that impressive, and that's okay. what we want is the training effect and getting the work in. So I've mentioned this briefly before the long run on Saturday about fuel mix. And what we've done in the past is we've figured out what is the carbohydrate caloric deficit between what you can store and what you need to cover 26.2 miles. And that's roughly 500 to 600 calories. It's that once you get to 20 miles, where's that carbohydrate coming from? And we take it early on because we don't want carbohydrate stores to get too low. So we're taking it, but we're really setting up the last 10K. So one of the things that I expect that you've read about, heard about, maybe talked about, either with me, I've had this conversation with a few people, or the people that you're training with, is taking in more carbohydrate. And here's kind of the thought behind that. What we know about carbohydrate and fat, which is your fuel mix for endurance running. We know that the slower you run, the more you can rely on fat. The faster you run, the more you need to rely on carbohydrate. If you're running very high intensity, over threshold, certainly over 90, 95%, it's all carbohydrate, you're not burning any fat. Part of the reason that we do long runs is to help your body utilize fat as a fuel source. So we're using that, we're trying to get better, as I think Covert Bailey said, better burners. We're trying to be able to burn more fat into that mix because you have an essentially unlimited amount of fat to burn, at least when we're talking about a 26.2 mile race, and certainly longer than that. And the carbohydrate is a little bit finite. So as people are maybe doubling the amount of carbohydrate that we've traditionally wanted to take in, what they're doing is seemingly getting a higher octane mix. More carbohydrate, less fat, because carbohydrate is the most efficient fuel source. We won't confuse this conversation talking about ketones and ketosis. We'll leave this to the carbohydrate fat mix. So that's why you might find that you feel better, you can run stronger, you have higher energy throughout the race by taking in more carbohydrate. So I haven't used the words long run lab for a few weeks, but I'm going to pull that back out because we need to figure this out. And as we know, if we look at the weeks between now and Boston or Carmel, we're essentially cutting those in half, and that's the number of longer endurance runs that we have left to practice. And yes, you want to practice it on the shorter, faster long runs as well, because some things you tolerate really well, your stomach does really well with at a low intensity, but when the intensity goes up to race day intensity, it doesn't work out so well. So we want to practice on both of those. So what you might do, and yes, I did talk a few weeks ago about not using gels as frequently. And that's because coming off of Monumental for most of you, or whatever your fall marathon or half marathon was, the long runs weren't all that long. And for somebody to go out and do, for most people to go out and do a 10-mile run and take a gel or two, you don't need to do that. Teach your body to burn as much fat as possible, even when we're thinking this way, because there still will be a percentage of fat in your fuel mix. And we want you to be very efficient at burning that. So some long runs, you might try to use gel sparingly or as needed, break in case of emergency kind of thing. And others, let's see how much you can take in. And the other thing that has to be considered in this, what can you do on race day? So if you set up a course at Eagle Creek or around home and you can get to a bottle or a gel every 3 miles, and you figure out I can take in 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour, but then you get to race day and how am I going to get all of this? How do I carry all of this? How do I get this on course? So those need to be considerations when you're figuring out how much can I take. It's not only how much can your stomach tolerate, which is usually the limiting factor. It's also how do I get access to this? So think about those things as well. And you might be just looking for new running shorts that have more pockets to carry more gels. I don't know what that is, but keep that in mind as well. So start figuring that out now. Again, I know it's January. It seems crazy early to be doing things fast. It seems crazy early to be thinking about race day nutrition, but it's coming quickly. If you look at the number of weeks and where we would be in the summer preparing for Chicago or Monumental, we're closer than it feels. So that's why I want to point that out now and get you to start working on that. So that took a little bit longer to explain than I intended, but hopefully that's helpful and will prove to be even more helpful as you start to practice it. I mentioned last week about group runs. This week we had a nice turnout on Tuesday. We had a fantastic turnout on Saturday, so thank you for that. If you want to join the cool kids and show up for a group run at Eagle Creek or in Broad Ripple on Tuesday night, I'd love to see you.